Today is the 11th of August, 2025. As so many times in the past, I was going to do a video on one thing, and I'm going to end up doing it in another, something else. Why is that? First of all, the video I was going to do was sort of titled Two Men, Two Americans, two different people in positions of power, different powers, different authorities, two visions of the world, two different temperaments or personalities. I was thinking of President Trump and Pope Leo XIV. And I'm going to end up doing it on something different, which is a different vision of history. Why? First of all, because as I started thinking about it, I didn't feel that I was really that qualified to talk about these two men and their personalities and so on. I could tell you very roughly what I think of the Pope, which is just what I think, the an idea that I have. About a month ago, I said that he should go to Gaza. I hadn't heard anyone saying that. I thought of it because I thought it was so obvious to me that what was happening a month ago, imagine now, what was happening a month ago required him to be there. And I did a video, a very short video, which was perhaps too emotional, but sometimes emotion has to come into it, naturally. But since then, I heard others actually asking for the same. I'm not saying that anyone is copying me here. I'm just saying that I was quite happy that I wasn't the only one thinking this. Well, he hasn't been, he hasn't gone there yet, and I'm actually quite disappointed. But I was going to start with these two different men. The Pope seems to me is only an opinion, as you can understand, just appearance, but seems to be a man who proceeds with caution, aware that if he goes too fast, he's aware of the hornets' nests that are on either side. So he proceeds with care, but I think firmly. He seems to have a calm and gentle temperament, but still seems to me firm. Firm in that I don't think he's going to allow himself to be manipulated. I think he's on either side or many sides. I think he's proceeding with caution as to what he wants to achieve. And I think he has a firmness there that an ability to avoid being manipulated, especially in this after this hurricane that Pope Francis was. So he prefers to move forward with small concrete steps rather than with grand gestures. All right. On the other hand, we have, I'm not going to talk about this. I'm just going to tell you what I was thinking. All right. On the other side, I was going to say, we have President Trump, who is a totally different person. Won't go into that. But in any case, so then I found myself that I perhaps I was trying to do something that I couldn't really do. But then this news came that President Trump is meeting President Putin on the 15th of August, and everyone is talking about it. And then I saw these two men again, this difference. Again, putting a cautious man, a strategic man, more than tactical. Yeah. Certainly, the main difference is that he is a person, he's educated, uh, steeped in history, as we all know it. And you give him a microphone, he starts talking about the, beginning with the 9th century and so on. And President Trump, not so much. Yeah. Okay. So then I thought, okay, so I got into this history thing, different visions of history. And the Pope is an Augustinian. So I thought, I know where to go because St Augustine had a vision of history. Now, the moment I say St Augustine, those of you who follow me are going to stay. But those of you passers-by will say, oh my God, no, a saint or something, and you will want to leave. Don't leave, because I think we have to be a little bit patient and learn to listen from the past. Besides being a bishop and a theologian and a doctor of the church, he was more than, well, additionally, he was a very educated man in philosophy, Greek philosophy, all that. Okay, so it's worth our time to listen to what he had to say about history and the how history evolves. All right. So I'm going to talk about history, but more than that, civilization, his view of civilization, before I start on his vision, and then I'll bring it to the present time at the end, okay? And talk a little bit about the multipolar world and China and so on, okay? But just bear with me. First of all, with Augustine. Just to introduce him for a couple of minutes, okay? Because I know that there are people, for example, in Pakistan listening, okay, and other places. So sometimes I have to make it too clear, perhaps, to some of us in the West, especially Catholic audiences. But okay, so he had a philosophy of history. He was born in a place called Tagaste, which is in Algeria, in the province of Numidia, which is now known as Souk Ahras, and died in Hippo Regius, which is now Annaba in Algeria. Now, Hippo Regius is on the Mediterranean coast, about 60 miles from Tagaste. The distance between Hippo Regius and Carthage is approximately 300 kilometers. Okay. His mother was Monica, Saint Monica, Catholic. Of course, at that time, that world was all Catholic. A very devout woman. And his father, Patricius, or Patrick perhaps, who was a pagan in those days, even though Christianity was legal, it was not everyone was Christian, of course. So his father was not a Christian, he was pagan, but he did later convert very near death. So Hippo, where he stayed for such a long time in North Africa, uh, important to emphasize that it was near Carthage, and Carthage was one of the richest part of the Roman Empire in actual fact at that time. Not today. Today is arid, the desert has advanced towards the coast, but at the time was a very rich town. He was born in 354. His mother was North African. She was from the Berber tribe, which is now associated perhaps with Morocco. Yeah. Islam was still many hundreds of years, 300 years still ahead. Okay, so she was Catholic, and Patricius, his father, was a civil servant, uh, and he got baptized in the year 371, just before dying. His mother, as I said, was a very devout Christian, but at the same time with a great ambition for him to do well in the world, to be somebody, to do well, to become part of the empire and do well. And this was before the empire, the Roman Empire, was destroyed by the barbarians, which was going to happen in his lifetime. And because he wanted him to succeed in the world, she was very sorry about this and cried afterwards, didn't pay perhaps too much attention. She felt that she was at fault herself, that she didn't pay enough attention to his religious formation. She assumed that when he went off and had a great pleasurable life all over the place, she assumed that it had been her fault, as mothers always do. Anyway, he received his first education. He studied rhetoric, preparing him for perhaps the study of law. In 371, he went to Carthage, that rich city, but being a city and being very rich, it was also very corrupt, certainly morally corrupt. And he, as he explains, succumbed to that world, had a relationship with a young lady, and had a son whom he called Adeodatus, given by God, altogether Adeodatus. Anyway, gave himself to the pleasures that the world had to offer, led, in his own words, a very depraved life, very contemptuous of his mother's religion, didn't take it at all seriously. For him, Catholicism, he saw it as a bunch of, old wives' tales and so on, didn't pay any attention at all. Something for old women kind of thing. He read a work by Cicero. At that time, the education meant reading philosophy, literature, rhetoric. He was very much attracted to it, to see life and politics beyond what you can see with the naked eye, the why of things, and delved more and more into this why of things. And he loved philosophy. Soon after, he registered himself, subscribed himself as an auditor, not auditor, books auditor, but auditor from a listener, an attendee, as it were, to listen to lectures given by a sect called the Manichaeans. And the Manichaeans were called so because of their founder, Mani. Now, this heretical sect, yes, had two principles, believed in two principles that governed the world: a principle of good and a principle of evil. But not as we Christians would say, the devil against God in that way. No, there were two gods, two parallel gods that were the same, yeah, just different, like the pagan gods that used to fight against each other. Well, they saw two gods, and that fought against each other. They saw themselves as a new scientific philosophical movement, very much fighting against Christianity. It was a religion independent of authority at the top. He liked that very much. Um, and so he became a member of the sect. He will write against it later on, but for the moment he was perfectly happy in that sect. Then became a professor of the liberal arts, as it was called then, perhaps the humanities today. And her mother was very upset now about his life. Uh, she saw that he had completely abandoned or disparaged the Catholic faith, cried and cried and cried, as he tells us, lamenting this fact. She saw it as her own fault, as I said, that she hadn't taken his religion formation seriously. Anyway, she saw it as her fault and that she hadn't paid enough attention. One day, a Catholic bishop comforted her. I say Catholic bishop, I have to emphasize that because the Manichaeans also had bishops, as many sects do, pseudo bishops, and they had their own. And but this Catholic bishop encouraged her, saying, "It is not possible," he said, "that the son of so many tears will continue on the road to perdition." Do you remember that? The road to perdition. Not possible that the son of so many tears will continue on that road to perdition, that God will step in and show some compassion. Anyway, Augustine, he then was transferred to Carthage, and she's now beginning by this time as professor, by the way. And he's now beginning to doubt a little bit his theosophy of the Manichaeism. The doubts grow and grow only because it seemed to him that this was irreconcilable with Greek philosophy, which he so admired. That dualism of a God of good and a God of evil was a contradiction with the concept that there is one God. He accepted the idea of one God, and he could not understand how, there is one God fighting another God. The doubts grew. I mean, I'm just going through, and he eventually came to the conviction that he had been wrong, really, that he could no longer go along with it. It no longer made sense to him, philosophically speaking. So he went and talked to one of these pseudo-Manichaean bishops. His name was Faustus. And he wasn't at all impressed with the questions that he was asking and the argumentation that bishop was giving him. In fact, actually, he thought that his understanding of theology was so precarious that he actually saw him more as a charlatan. More and more doubts, can this religion be true if its representatives are such charlatans, he thought. Anyway, more and more doubts, he became more and more uncomfortable. He went to Rome, still a Manichaean, he hadn't left. But now there was a sense of quite a lot of skepticism about it. Um, began to think, well, perhaps all this is nonsense. Perhaps there isn't truth as such. Everything is sort of relative, really. It was a complete mental mess. Okay, so early in 384, he got from the prefect of Rome, who was a pagan in the Roman Empire. Okay, in the Roman Empire, a Praetorian prefect. The prefectus praetorio would be, if we want to sort of an equivalence, would be sort of equivalent to a modern day um, chief of staff or something like that, or a national security advisor, something like that. But a prefect of the city, and this one was a prefect of the city of Rome, would be similar to a mayor or something like that, to a governor, something like that. Anyway, there were other prefects like those in charge of the grain supply or the fire brigade, who would be sort of more comparable today to cabinet ministers or department heads. Anyway, this one, Sima, was an intellectual. He also he gave him actually, granted him a cathedra, the chair of rhetoric, very, which was very important. Rhetoric was very important at the time. They taught you how to speak, how to persuade, how to convince. We no longer do it like that. I think if you look at debates at university, it's more about winning the argument now. Just that. I notice that young people, when they want to win the argument, they start speaking very fast, as if being articulate meant being right. Not necessarily. You have to be a good philosopher. And, yeah. Okay, so uh, he had the he had won a competition by the state in oratory, and he went to Milan. That is where he exercised it. Um, so, professor of rhetoric, safe. Okay, good job. His mother and other relatives were now with him, but he felt tormented. He said, he explains, he was slave to his passions, could not control them. So his disappointment with the Manichaeans and then this skepticism, he was a little bit lost. He found no religion to follow. And but still sort of searching for something, he ended up one day in Milan in front of a cathedral, a Catholic cathedral, and he went in. And the bishop there was preaching a sermon. And he was lucky enough to hear St. Ambrose, actually, doctor of the church, preaching a sermon. Now, he was explaining in that sermon how the Old Testament was the preamble to the New Testament. In other words, it was not chapter one or one book, another book, or chapter one and chapter two, but one was the introduction, as it were, to the book. Ambrose was a great orator in any case. That helped him to understand now why help him to understand the Manichaean stand on the Old Testament, which was very negative, because the Manichaeans used to say, they still say, because they haven't gone away, that the God of the Old Testament was, there are still some, was a bad God, a vengeful God. And Ambrose made it clear that this was an error. So by understanding God as, he came to understand God as that pure spirit. He came to understand a lot of other things, the immortality of the soul, freedom, free will, from a philosophical perspective. And they are in accordance, they were and they are in accordance with the teachings of the Catholic Church, that old religion, you know, the that his mother had. So he began to take it seriously, and he perhaps came to realize that it was not necessarily just an old wives' tale thing. It was intellectual. Anyway, he converted, he was baptized on Holy Saturday, and with his son, he was baptized by St. Ambrose. Went back to Africa through Rome. Monica now was very, very happy. He had changed his life. He spent 1 year in Rome. His mother died there. He died in Ostia in his arms. He went to Africa now, and for 3 years he led a sort of a monastic life with some friends. His fame began to spread, and the Bishop of Hippo asked him to consider becoming a priest. He eventually became a priest, Catholic priest. He was ordained. He studied more theology, philosophy, always now looking at it from a Catholic perspective. Loved it. Now, Valente, the bishop, made him his assistant. He became assistant auxiliary bishop. And with his priests, he continued living a rather a monastic life, preaching volumes and volumes and volumes of sermons by St Augustine. He engaged in many debates theologically. The first one, the controversies with against the Manichaeans. During the first 10 years, around the year 400, he wrote against Manichaeism. The second period, against another heresy, the Donatists, the founder Donatus, a Catholic bishop who separated from Rome. They were very successful in Northern Africa. They actually reached about 600 bishops, pseudo bishops, and they would just change and take the Catholic bishop out and put their bishop in a total mess. Anyway, he enters into debates with them. He had a great victory also in a public dispute against another heresy, the Pelagians. Pelagius, a monk, who said that you could be saved by your own strength alone, by your own will, without any help, outside of grace. So Augustine is going to write against this Pelagian era. Well, semi-Pelagian, because he says, well, they believe that God gives you an initial sort of grace, but but then you have to you're by yourself, you continue alone. God gives you that initial kick, and then it's all up to us. Augustine said, not quite. The grace of God is there from the beginning to the end, sustaining us. This is in volumes and volumes, okay? He's called in the church the Doctor of Grace, emphasize grace above human will. There is grace and then man's cooperation with it or not, or non-acceptance, not consent to that grace. But the grace is there if you want it, if you consent to it. Anyway, this is a panoramic view. He died in 430 when the Vandals were invading the whole of Europe. They were surrounding the city of Hippo, which is where he dies. And this is what brought me to him, because the work on, he wrote a book, the Civitate Dei, the City of God. And it's a work, really, the second part, certainly, is a theology of history. This is written because of some polemics that he probably maintained with some group or other. It is at the time of crisis in the Roman Empire. The empire begins to crack, or perhaps it had already cracked, perhaps it begins to creak. It has already cracks, but they're beginning to be very obvious that the empire is in total decline, a huge crisis, really comparable with I don't know. I was going to say with today. I'm just saying that the decline is obvious, is evident. Yeah. So in 410, they are there, the barbarians at the Roman gate. The gate in the it was called the gate of Rome. It was called the Gate of Salt, or Porta Salaria. Was part of the Aurelian walls built in the 3rd century. And it was called the Via Salaria because it was a road that salt passed through it and was used for transporting salt from the Adriatic coast. And the hordes of Alaric were there, tremendous barbarians that camped outside. They occupied Rome, sacked Rome, and withdrew after 6 days of plunder and looting. This caused a huge impression in the whole of the empire. Rome was called the Invicta, the invincible city, for centuries. For the Romans, it was impossible that this could have happened to the empire. Rome and the empire were practically immortal, eternal. It was the norm. The nobles and the people who loved the empire, patriotic, they couldn't believe, especially after all the details became known. When Augustine heard, he said in a sermon, because this everyone was touched by it. He said, horrible things we are being told, ruins, robberies, fires, deaths, tortures, dishonor. All these things have been told to us 1,000 times, and as many times we have lamented and wept for, and still we cannot console ourselves for what has happened. And St. Jerome also, who was in Jerusalem, he said, I couldn't but cry when I heard what had happened. The fall of your country, the fall of the empire. You say, what is happening? But here's an idea. The pagans in town began to say, how was this possible? How could it be that their country had fallen like that? Why had Rome fallen? How could it be possible? This Invicta city fallen to barbarians. Who was at fault here? What happened? Well, blame the Christians. Their fault. And they explained it logically. When Rome was pagan, it was glorious. Now that it's Christian, this is what happens. Now, Augustine took this seriously, took this argument seriously, because it did impress him. He took it seriously, made him reflect, and felt that he had to respond to it. And also among the Christians too, why did God allow this chaos? What use was the purpose of Christianity, the conversion of sinners, all that? He had to respond. So, right in the middle of that invasion, he's writing this. Imagine that you're writing when you are in your city and, it's being looted and, death all around. You sit down to write this. We still use the word vandal to mean let's say, a rupture with order, chaos, yeah? So he wrote Civitate Dei as a response. In those days, chapters in a book were called books, okay? We call them now chapters, but they were called books. So the first 11 books were to reply to the objection of the pagans. And the last 12 books, the last 12 chapters, is about a vision of history. And this is what interests me here. So he's going to talk about two cities. Now, bear with me for a second. I know you all know this, but two loves, because he's going to use metaphors and allegories and things about in order to explaining about the angels. And okay, bear with me. Okay, so two loves founded two cities: love of God and which he calls dilectio, and then another word which sometimes is translated as despectus or contemptuous, contempt of mankind. But essentially, this is not what he meant. Augustine believed that the true love of God necessitates a proper ordering of love, prioritizing God above all else, including the self and other humans. This doesn't mean that he feels contempt for humanity or despises humanity, but rather recognizing God's superior worth and directing love, directing love accordingly. So the term that he used is minus precium, minus precium. It means less value. Humanity has less value. Above all is God, and then below him is the rest of us, humanity. So exaltation of God and minus precium, yeah. The lowering of man below God, yeah. This love, God first, mankind afterwards, created, engendered the city of God, what he's going to call the city of God. And on the contrary, on the other side, this other city, the exaltation of man and the minus precium of God. Yes, it will end up with man first and God somewhere, if anywhere, okay? And that putting man first engendered the city of the world, or the city of man. So he's going to take us along this path of God first or man first. The city of man is going to become obvious that it is a city of arrogance. These two cities that are bound to be always in confrontation with one another. Of course, you understand that city here is a way of thinking, yeah? I say this only because the city of God may be, we are trying to avoid this, these people good, those people bad, this country good, that country bad, this church good, that church bad, because he's going to explain it's not about that. It's about in each place, in each city, in each country, in each religion, there could be good people following God and bad people who put man first. That's the difference. So they are not all together, the good here and the bad there. They are always mixed. But in any case, there are those who would put God first and those who would put man first. So it's two different ways of thinking, two cosmovisions, two points of view. I always try to find the American word because Americans are very good at finding this, two roadmaps. Perfect word. Roadmap. Perfect. So the citizens of these two cities are dispersed throughout the world, but are united by a common thread, the love of God as supreme being, God at the top, and man subordinated to God, a creature of God. And the other, man supreme, the God man, or the man God, all subordinated to man, God included. So he speaks of the origin of each city, and he's going to go and use allegory and all kinds of things, but he goes back to, this is interesting, he goes back to the Old Testament. He has in mind from the beginning Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, the good and the bad from Genesis. But in order to explain it, he's going to start with, so we can understand it if we follow him, okay? With the good angels and the bad angels, if you want the good spirits or the bad spirits. Behind human drama, behind human tragedy, there is a beginning and a middle and an end. The good angels, something, okay, good angels, is there something there? Is it nothing to do with us? No. He's going to bring this to the fore. Good psychological work here, if you ask me. Not like the Manichaeans, a good God and a bad God. No. God created all good. If something became bad, is that something's own fault. So of those angels, here comes the whole thing, of those angels whom God created good, some stayed faithful, led by Michael, and others rebelled, led by Lucifer. I shall not serve. Good and evil, two cities began. On earth, a continuation of this. On the one side, those who ask, who could be like God? And on the other say, I am God. In other words, disobedience. On the one hand, humility, acknowledgement that we are below God, we are His creatures. On the other, arrogance, I shall not serve. So we have here humility and arrogance, the I and me confronting God. And he writes very beautifully, and we can all understand it. He says, the bad angels look at themselves as if in a mirror. They looked at themselves in a mirror and saw and saw themselves so beautiful, so perfect, so magnificent, because God had created them magnificent, but they saw themselves so magnificent, he says, with sublime intelligence, with a decided, firm will, and they decided to, looking at themselves in the mirror, decided to worship themselves. They admired themselves so much that they forgot that they were an image, a vestige of God. This is how he explains it. Now, the good, however, when they looked at themselves, saw, as St. John of the Cross said it so beautifully. I wish you could all know Spanish just to read this magnificent poet. He said it so beautifully. He said, the good ones, what they saw, that God left the whole of his creation dressed in his beauty. The whole of his creation dressed in his beauty. But they saw that they could see that they were not God themselves, but his creatures. So this goes against the Manichaeans. Not only them, but you cannot say that the nature of the bad angels was due to their own nature. No, that's too easy. That's a way of escaping blame. It was the will of some that got their understanding twisted and established that separation that was to open this precipice among ones and the others. That is a false interpretation of what good is, a false interpretation of what good is. And that love of self created the city of the world, the city, the worldly city, the earthly city, the city of man. Cain and Abel, etc. He says, Cain, from the very beginning, yeah, Cain is arrogant, vengeful. It ends in assassination, death, homicide. Abel is just, the shepherd. The shepherd, you see, is nomadic. He's a nomad. The shepherd, the nomad has certain more faith in God. Cain is a builder of cities. Cities are usually more arrogant, more sure of themselves. Contrast between humility and arrogance. The nomad depends on the weather, let's say, many things that come from on high. There's this battle between these two cities now began. And each city, each cosmovision, each city has a leader because it is a compound of peoples. So here you have Christ and Satan. But the theological struggle is not just a human confrontation led by man, it's a confrontation that's transcendental. It goes beyond. It's between Christ and Satan. So, stay with me here. Christ is, therefore, the head of the church from creation to the parousia, that is, until the glorious second coming of Christ at the end of time. Christ is by church, Augustine is going to say, the head of all mankind. This is actually quite an idea from St Augustine. When we think about the church, about Christianity, Catholicism, Christ founded the church, and we are, for example, we Catholics are members of that church, right? Augustine says the church exists actually since Adam, since Abel, because from these times, Christ is prefigured there. Christ is the center of history. By Christ, Christ is already potentially in the Old Testament. That is why in the Mass, the names of Abraham and Isaac and the priesthood of Melchizedek are mentioned in the Mass. The great of the Old Testament, they being the outlines, what's the right word? The outlines of Christ, the images of Christ that is going to come. So the whole Bible heads towards Christ. The Jewish Passover prefigures the Christian Pasch. The Jewish Pasch, also known as the Passover, is a major Jewish holiday commemorating the exodus of the Israelites from slavery from slavery in Egypt. The Hebrew name for Passover is Pesach. The holiday's name, Passover, I read here, is derived from the biblical story where the angel of death passed over the houses of the Israelites during the 10th plague, sparing their firstborn sons. But also the Pentecost prefigures the Christian Pentecost. Jewish Pentecost is called Shavuot. It's a holiday that commemorates the giving of the Torah to Moses and the Israelites at Mount Sinai, and also marks the beginning of the wheat harvest. Shavuot is celebrated on the 50th day after the second day of Passover, hence the name Pentecost, which means 50th in Greek. Now, what Augustine says, is that if you don't understand it like this, and if you're a Christian and don't understand it like this, that the Old Testament is prefiguring what is going to happen and materialize in the New Testament, then you're not reading it from a Christian perspective. You are reading it not from a Christian lens, but from a Jewish lens. The whole of history is therefore the history of the body of Christ the head, and his body, the church. All right, so if Christ is the head of the city of God, then obviously Satan is going to be the head of the city of man. The head of a body, continues to explain, influences the rest of the body, and so Satan, or the devil, or call it what you will, is the head of a city, let's call it that, that leads it as a general does its troops. That's Satan or Lucifer or the devil or excuse me. The devil is not no dear. The devil is not inside of us. Well, sometimes people, they say that, when you have to exercise someone, that perhaps, but it's not inside, leading our actions from the inside. But yes, it can lead us like a general into temptations. It's not an inner kingdom, but it's as the head of evil, he tempts us and governs us from the outside, and he ties to himself. So anyway, so Christ and the church, Satan and Babylon. I'm sorry about Babylon in Iraq, which is always obviously taking as a symbol of sin. It's now in Iraq, but okay, so the city of God is a pilgrim city, he explains. The city of the world is fixed. We are either on a journey towards somewhere, or we are here being the earth, being our final destination. There is a real difference here. The city of God, looking at eternity, sees the present world as something that is transient. It passes, a place that ultimately cannot offer man the rest the rest that he so longs for. The terrestrial city, the city of man, focus on the temporal, and so we to look for happiness here and now. Pleasures, hedonism, the only horizon destiny that it has is itself. So Augustine, he will say that God made man vertical, not horizontal as he did animals. Why animals horizontal? Well, because it's beginning, their beginning, end, and their horizon is earth. Once an animal dies, it no longer is. It dies, it disappears. Yeah. It does not have a spiritual soul. An animal has no moral discernment. That doesn't mean that he doesn't feel happy or sad or things like that. Okay, some certain emotions depending on, the animal, but we're talking about moral discernment. They cannot be blamed for something that they did intentionally. Okay, so horizontal, but man is vertical because he can think of things above himself. Could say that the present man is horizontal in many cases. The earth, the economy, politics, nothing beyond. And Cain begot Enoch. In the biblical story, Cain's firstborn son was named Enoch. And after Enoch's birth, Cain built a city and named it after him. Earthy, not pilgrim in the world, but slothful even in its own temporal understanding of peace and happiness. Augustine would say that the peace of Christ is different, not like the one that the world gives you. By the way, the word Cain in the Hebrew means possession. Possession. Rooted to the earth, meaning possession fixed, nothing beyond, no transcendence. Its God is earthy, its destiny is obsolete, its kingdom is ephemeral. This city with the uncontrolled flow of passions, fighting, wars, animosity of its members, always one against the others, all with the interest of domination, divided against itself, fighting. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen in the church, of course. I think it was Pope Benedict XVI who said that there is at the moment more chaff than wheat in the church. Talking about the traitors from the inside. So, good and bad everywhere, mixed in any society. These two cities are always facing each other. Always the city of God will suffer the persecution and hatred of the city of man, for they see them as different with other values. They're different, so let us kill them. Remember, his vision is from, he died in 430, 5th century. He wrote until that time, but of course he couldn't possibly know what was going to happen in history, yeah? So he left us with this view. It's like a Schubert unfinished symphony, the last movement to be written later. And we are going to see it later. We are going to see the French Revolution, the Soviet, the Bolshevik Revolution, well, the Protestant Revolution first, then certain times in history. This is, I want you to consider it because I find it extremely interesting and challenging. And now, globalism, let's call it that. There are two conceptions of history. One, Greek. There is the perpetual return, this also in Eastern philosophies, but in a different way, though. But in Greek thought, one perpetual return. There is no beginning and there is no end. History is a circle. It repeats itself. We heard it many times that history repeats itself. We're talking about different things here. Repeats itself in the sense that human nature doesn't change, and so we are going to continue making the same mistakes in different situations. Yes, repeating, yeah. But this is in a different sense. He saw history as almost linear, with a beginning, a middle, and an end, as it were. Redemption, the apocalypses ending in the parousia, remember when he was writing this, he was surrounded by the Vandals. He didn't come to see Christendom, for example. I don't say Christianity. Christianity is one thing, and Christendom, which is what it became, is another. For example, in China there are Christians there, but the country, but it's not. Christendom is you cannot call it Christendom. There are individual Christians, but not a society based on Christian principles, not Christendom as Europe became. Christendom, when the gospel permeates the temporal world, which it did at one time, politics, art, economics, culture. It did well, it is called the Dark Ages, the dark times, that tenebrous, dark, savage time. It is, I don't think, an exaggeration to say that it was done on purpose. And the purpose was to attack the main enemy at that time when it began to be called this, which was to attack the Catholic Church. It is false that it was that period in time was the Dark Ages, perhaps in science. But in science is progressive. Yes, actually, it was the time when universities started. Universities throughout the whole of Europe. Universities did not happen in China or in India with their 1,000-years-old civilization. It was during this time. Europe had saintly kings, Saint Louis of France, Fernando of Castile, Saint Vladimir of Russia, Stephen of Hungary, lots of them. It is also the epoch of great theologians, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Bonaventure. We haven't had those like that. Okay. It is the time of the Romanesque and Gothic cathedrals. Why do people come to Europe to visit what? Parking lots? This was not dark ages. It is an opportunity to attack the church, which created them. So, Christendom at the time was like an application, if we follow Augustine here, it was like an application of the city of God in the temporal world that had to be dismantled by the city of man. We're not trying to say that the people then were all saints and the people now we're all sinners. But a sinner was acknowledged as a sinner, and a sin was a sin. Now a sin has become, well, it doesn't exist. But if it does exist, it's mental disease or something like that. There is no God now. So obviously, if there is no God, there is no sin. But that era was actually quite glorious, lasted about 3 centuries, from 1050 to 1350, let's say. At the end, that block of Christendom began to crack. And not soon after, several steps were to divide it completely. First of all, the Protestant Revolution, Martin Luther. Europe, Christendom will be divided into 2 large parts. We don't have time here to talk about Luther, but nevertheless, it is the first milestone towards the end of Christendom. Then, perhaps worse, the French Revolution, that begins a politics that cuts off society from God completely. Secularism now cuts off religion. It's no longer the sovereignty of God, but the sovereignty of man. Man in capital letters, the rights of man. Yes, of course, man has rights and duties as a creature of God. No one had denied that. But now take God out of everything, the rights of man disassociated from the dignity of having been created in the image of God, just man alone, man as God. Free man from those rights and duties to God. So man becomes the creator of his own rights. The majority politics uprooted from God and religion entirely. There is no longer transcendence. We are here on earth by the earth, for the earth. Man's reason exalted. Remember the goddess reason, the statue of reason that was taken into Notre Dame Cathedral, displacing the Virgin Mary, the goddess of reason. Wasn't this what St Augustine was talking about? So that's the French Revolution. Then we have the Bolshevik Revolution in the Soviet Union, encouraged by the same city of man, the same cabal, which continues with these ideas. But it sounds strange to say that worse, but it's a step further now, because look, Luther took the first step. He denied the Catholic Church, let's say, in favor of churches separated from the Catholic Church. Then the French Revolution, that accepts a sort of God somewhere, the God of, I don't know, the God of secret societies, the architect of some sort of God, and some entity. Some God, but no longer Christ. Luther accepted Christ and accepted God. He didn't accept the Catholic Church. The second step in the French Revolution not only does not accept the Church, of course, but does not accept Christ as God. Just some entity up there, okay. Then the third step, Marxism, which denies even the idea of a God, however distant himself, any idea of God. And this is going to be a fight against God, the idea of God, an open war against any idea of any God or any transcendence. So as you can see, there has been an evolution in the... So Augustine is not entirely wrong, you see, even though he's talking about angels and things. No. Can you see? There has been a development in history on where the world is going, so to speak. First, an approach to the city of God up to the Middle Ages, and then the city of man, or Satan reigning in the city of man. And today, these false confrontations. Today, let's call it globalism. I don't know what to call it anymore. Okay. Today is not even the city of man, but the city of the machine. Now is not even the man, but post-human. Post-human. not even man, the triumph of immanence, and here and now, the finishing off completely of any transcendence. Not only of any transcendence, but the finishing off of man himself, of humanity itself. So the city of God shrinking, 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 the city of man expanding, expanding, expanding. We've seen it. And now, how is it going to end, the city of man? So, we are assured that the last, certainly by St Augustine, that the last victory will be Christ's. But the penultimate, not the ultimate, but the penultimate moment will be indeed dramatic. We're told of the Antichrist. I'm never quite sure about what this means, the Antichrist, the apocalypse. When the city of man dominates completely in politics, universal power, and only a small remnant resists, harassed and persecuted in this last moment. And then Augustine says the glorious coming of Christ at the end of history, the city of man destroyed from on high, the Lamb defeating the beast. The Antichrist, which seems to be a man, the vicar of Satan. And is this a pessimistic view? Not, well, I don't know. It is in a way, isn't it? But there remains a small island of Christianity. Perhaps the catacombs. And when he was writing, remember, I said it already twice, but remember that he was being surrounded by people who were killing and plundering the city. In this atmosphere, he's writing this book. He could not have envisaged a time of Christendom. And today, perhaps we're surrounded by modern vandals in power. He says, this is quite powerful, actually. The work that the gospel will have to permeate our society. He says, God will not ask us for the victories we have accomplished, but for the scars we bear for our struggles in the battles, in which we all must play a part, big or small, at this time when God has granted us to live. I was going to continue, but I think this is enough for this video because otherwise I'm going to complicate it. I was going to end up talking about today, but I think I leave it for the next one. So I thank you for your attention and hope to see you again. Bye-bye.